And I don't think either of those two would have been able to cope. They'd been anywhere else. And that was the only good thing that happened, was that they were there.
Something inside the palace has snapped, and this time, it's not just whispers, it's war. The British royal family, long wrapped in polished silence and controlled narratives, is now bleeding secrets. And at the center of this unraveling storm stands Princess Anne, furious, relentless, and ready to drag everything into the harsh, unforgiving light. What started as a quiet suspicion has exploded into a scandal so audacious, so brazen, it feels almost unreal. And yet, every detail points to something deeper, something that's been hiding in plain sight for far too long. Behind the grand gates of Balmoral Castle, a place sacred not just as a royal residence, but as an emotional sanctuary tied to Queen Elizabeth II's memory, something was happening that wasn't supposed to happen. Not quietly, not discreetly, but boldly, almost recklessly. Production trucks slipping in at dawn, catering vans unloading like a full-scale event was underway, film equipment being wheeled through corridors that had once held only royal footsteps. And the most shocking part? Everyone involved believed they had permission, not from the palace, not from the king, but from one man, Tom Parker Bowles. And this is where the story takes a sharp, almost unbelievable turn. Tom, the son of Queen Camilla, allegedly positioned himself as something he was never officially meant to be, a gatekeeper to royal access. He didn't just suggest it, he sold it, promised it, packaged Balmoral itself as a backdrop for a high-end food and travel documentary, offering something no one else could. Exclusive entry into one of the most private royal estates in the world. Investors lined up, production teams moved fast, money flowed, because who would question the son of the queen consort? But here's the crack in the story, the one detail that shatters the illusion. Princess Anne wasn't supposed to be there that day. Her visit to Balmoral was unannounced, unexpected. And when she stepped into that historic dining room, what she saw wasn't just a violation of protocol, it was a complete collapse of respect. Lights, cameras, crew, a full production unfolding inside a space that was meant to remain untouched, sacred, protected. And in that moment, something shifted. Witnesses say her reaction wasn't just anger, it was explosive, a controlled fury breaking loose. She didn't negotiate. She didn't hesitate. She ordered everything to stop, immediately. The kind of command that doesn't ask questions, it ends conversations. Within minutes, the operation that had been carefully set in motion for months was dismantled in chaos. And yet, the most chilling detail, Tom wasn't even there. He had already distanced himself, sending others to execute the plan while he remained comfortably away in London. Confident, too confident, as if he believed this would never be challenged. That assumption would become his biggest mistake. Because Anne didn't just shut it down, she started digging. Her first call to King Charles III. And the response? Shock. Genuine shock. No permission had been given. No project had been approved. The king himself had no knowledge of what was unfolding inside Balmoral. That moment, quiet, almost invisible, was the turning point. Because now, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't a minor breach. This was something else entirely. The next move came fast. Lawyers, investigations, documents pulled, contracts examined. And what they found didn't just complicate the story, it detonated it. This wasn't a one-time gamble. This had been building, quietly, strategically. Deals made, payments received, promises sold to multiple parties, all based on a claim that had no legal ground. Tom hadn't just opened a door, he had created an entire system around access that didn't belong to him. And the deeper they looked, the darker it became. Because the money trail didn't lie. Large sums had already been exchanged. Production companies had invested heavily, believing they were securing something exclusive, something real. Instead, they were caught in something far more dangerous, a web of representation that blurred the line between influence and authority, between connection and control. And once that line is crossed, it doesn't just raise questions, it invites consequences. But what makes this situation even more volatile is not just the act itself, it's what it represents. Balmoral isn't just a property, it's a symbol, a legacy. A deeply personal piece of history tied to a monarch who fiercely protected its privacy. And for Princess Anne, that connection isn't abstract, it's emotional, protective, almost sacred. So when she saw it being used not for duty, not for family, but for profit, it wasn't just a breach, it was a betrayal. And now everything is moving. The legal machinery is turning. The palace walls, once silent, are starting to echo with tension. Questions are multiplying. How far did this go? Who else knew? And most importantly, importantly, was this really the first time something like this happened, or just the first time someone got caught? Because if this was planned, if this was executed with such confidence, then it suggests something far more unsettling. A pattern, a belief that certain rules simply didn't apply. And Princess Anne, she's not letting this disappear quietly. The storm has only just begun. The moment this scandal should have quietly dissolved behind palace walls, it didn't. It escalated. It twisted. It exposed something far more dangerous than one reckless decision. It exposed a pattern. And the deeper investigators went, the more it became clear this wasn't just about Balmoral. This was about years of calculated behavior hiding behind royal proximity. Because once the lawyers started pulling threads, the entire fabric began to unravel. What they uncovered wasn't a single act of overconfidence. It was a system, a method, a way of operating that had quietly grown over time. Tom hadn't just been benefiting from his connection to Queen Camilla, he had been building an entire identity around it. Every meeting, every deal, every opportunity seemed to carry an invisible message. Access. Not official, not confirmed, but implied. And in elite circles, implication is often more powerful than truth. Restaurant owners began speaking. Not loudly, not publicly, but enough for whispers to reach the investigation. Stories of subtle pressure, of expectations that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Special treatment quietly demanded. Privileges casually assumed. Because when someone walks in carrying the weight of royal association, who dares to question it? Who risks saying no? That's where the real power was. Not in titles, but in perception. And perception had been weaponized. Corporate deals followed the same pattern. Brands weren't just paying for a food critic, they were paying for proximity, for that unspoken connection to the monarchy, for the illusion that somewhere, somehow, their products sat closer to the royal circle. Photos, appearances, curated moments, all carefully positioned to blur the line between personal career and royal endorsement. Not illegal on the surface, but dangerously misleading beneath it. And then came the documents. Because nothing destroys a narrative faster than paper. Contracts referencing access that didn't exist. Agreements built on permissions that were never granted. And most damaging of all, communications that carried the tone, the weight, even the appearance of official approval. Not explicitly forged at first glance, but crafted just enough to convince anyone reading them that this was legitimate, that this had backing, that this was real, but it wasn't. And once that realization hit, the entire situation shifted from questionable behavior to something much darker, because now it wasn't about privilege, it was about misrepresentation, about building financial gain on claims that couldn't be supported. And that changes everything, because intent starts to matter, patterns start to matter, and suddenly this isn't a mistake anymore, it's a strategy. Princess Anne saw it immediately. To her, this wasn't just someone crossing a line. This was someone who had been dancing on that line for years, pushing it further each time, testing how much could be taken before anyone pushed back. And now that someone had finally pushed back, the reaction inside the palace was anything but unified. Because while Anne was tightening her grip on the legal process, Queen Camilla was doing something very different, something desperate, something that revealed just how fragile the situation had become behind closed doors. She tried to contain it. At first, quietly. Conversations behind doors, appeals to reason, suggestions that this could be handled privately, that dragging it into court would damage more than it would fix. And on the surface, it sounded logical. Protect the institution, avoid the spectacle, keep it internal. But Anne wasn't buying it. Not for a second. Because to her, this wasn't about damage control, it was about accountability. And that's where everything fractured. Because now, this wasn't just about Tom anymore, it was about two powerful figures inside the royal family pulling in completely opposite directions. One demanding transparency, the other pushing for containment. And in the middle of it all, King Charles, caught in a position that no monarch ever wants to be in. Silent. And that silence, it didn't calm the situation. It amplified it. Because without a clear stance, the power struggle only grew louder. Camilla reportedly tried to smooth things over financially, offering to repay losses, to quietly resolve contracts, to erase the visible damage. But that solution only made things worse. Because money can settle accounts, but it doesn't erase intent. It doesn't undo what was built. And it certainly doesn't satisfy someone who believes the principle itself has been violated. Anne refused, completely. To her, accepting quiet repayment would mean accepting that consequences could be bought, that rules could be bent as long as the fallout was covered. And that was something she was never going to allow. Not inside an institution already walking a thin line between tradition and public scrutiny. And then things got messy. Because once the idea of keeping it quiet failed, other tactics began to surface. Narrative shifting, stories being planted, Whispers suggesting Anne was overreacting, that this was personal, that old tensions were being reignited under the disguise of legal righteousness. But those whispers didn't hold, not when the facts kept piling up, not when the evidence kept growing heavier. If anything, the attempt to reshape the narrative only added fuel to the fire, because now it didn't just look like misconduct, it looked like something trying to hide. And that's when the legal battlefield truly opened. What should have been straightforward quickly turned into something far more complicated. Questions of jurisdiction, authority, who actually has the power to bring this forward? Who controls the process when royal property is involved? The answers weren't clear, and that lack of clarity became a weapon because delays started stacking up. Technical challenges, legal arguments stretching the boundaries of interpretation. Every move met with resistance. Every step slowed down. Not enough to stop it, but enough to exhaust it. But Anne didn't step back. Even as the process dragged, even as the pressure mounted, she held her position. Because to her, this wasn't about winning a case, it was about setting a line that said clearly, connection is not authority, access is not ownership, and privilege does not place anyone above consequences. Meanwhile, the public was watching. Every leak, every rumor, every fragment of information turning into headlines. Because the story had something irresistible, a royal scandal not built on speculation, but on structure, on documents, on actions that could be traced. And that made it impossible to ignore. Inside the palace, the damage was already done. Trust fractured, relationships strained, gatherings turned tense, conversations guarded. Because once something like this surfaces, it doesn't just affect one person, it changes the atmosphere entirely. It forces everyone to reassess, to question, to wonder what else might be hidden beneath the polished surface. And that's the real story here. Not just what happened at Balmoral, but what it revealed. Because when someone can operate this close to power for this long without being stopped, it raises a question that no one inside the palace can comfortably answer. How much else has been quietly happening, unnoticed, unquestioned until now? And as the legal battle continues, one thing remains certain: this story isn't finished. It's still unfolding, and the next move might change everything.